My name is Julian. I'm 31 years old, a carpenter by trade, specializing in bespoke furniture and home remodels. My humble abode is a small apartment nestled above the workshop I lease on the east side of town. It's not grand, but the comforting scent of sawdust and the rhythmic patter of rain on the tin roof have, over the past few years, woven themselves into the fabric of what I call home. I've never been one for crowded gatherings. The clamor, the throng of strangers, the superficial chatter that dances around anything of substance, it all feels akin to constructing something without proper measurements. Yet, when my old friend, Ben, extended an invitation to his birthday celebration last Saturday, declining felt impossible. Our bond stretches back to our high school days, a time when we both envisioned ourselves conquering the world by 25. Now, well past 30, the world feels less like a conquest and more like a labyrinth we're still navigating. The party was hosted at Ben's place, a modest two-bedroom dwelling he shares with his partner, Chloe. I arrived fashionably late, which, for me, means precisely on time, a bottle of fine amber liquid in hand, secretly hoping to fulfill my social obligation without feeling utterly drained. The living room teemed with faces I vaguely recognized, former classmates, colleagues, neighbors, the kind of assembly where everyone seems privy to everyone else's affairs, yet true connection remains elusive. I discovered Ben in the kitchen, a few drinks deep, his face radiating that distinct joy that comes from being the center of attention on one special day. He clapped me on the shoulder, a wide grin spreading across his face, and pressed a chilled beer into my hand before I could even utter a greeting. Ben, voiceover, Julian, I wondered if you'd actually materialize. You know how you are with these shindigs. Narrator, I'm here, aren't I? I retorted, taking a sip of the beer. It was one of those artisanal IPAs that tasted as if a pine forest had been liquefied, but I managed a smile nonetheless. Happy birthday, old friend. We chatted for a few minutes about our respective lives, my current project, a bespoke dining table for a discerning client, and his rather uninspiring role at an insurance firm, which he described with the same zest one might reserve for a dental procedure. Our conversation settled into the familiar cadence of an enduring friendship, yet I could discern his attention drifting towards other guests, other conversations awaiting his presence. I didn't mind. That's simply the nature of these events. I gravitated towards the living room, finding refuge near a towering bookshelf, a perfect vantage point for observation without being drawn into the conversational crossfire. Ben had always been an avid reader, and I found myself perusing the titles, a collection of vintage sci-fi paperbacks and philosophy texts from his university days. I was engrossed in a classic by the legendary author, L.K. Vance, when a presence materialized beside me. Woman, voiceover, unearthing anything captivating. Narrator, I turned to behold Alara, Ben's elder sister. It had been at least 3 years since our last encounter, ironically, at Ben's previous birthday bash. She had changed. Her dark tresses were now cropped shorter, just grazing her shoulders, and she wore a simple, elegant black dress that somehow made her seem both more refined and more approachable than I remembered. Narrator, just browsing, I replied. Your brother certainly has an eclectic taste in literature. Alara, voiceover, most of these are actually mine. I left them here when I moved out. Narrator, she smiled, and I noticed her holding a glass of crimson wine, a departure from the ubiquitous beer. Alara, voiceover, I'm Alara, in case you've forgotten. Ben's sister. Narrator, Julian, I confirmed. Of course, I remember. And I did. Alara, 3 years our senior, had always existed on a different plane when we were younger. Already immersed in university life while Ben and I were still mastering the art of driving, she possessed an intimidating aura, the kind that intelligent, self-assured women exude to 18-year-old boys who believe they're worldly but are, in fact, utterly clueless. Alara, voiceover, you're the woodworker, aren't you? Ben mentioned you crafted his coffee table. Narrator, I gestured towards the living room, where the table I'd made served as a makeshift surface for an assortment of drinks and snacks. It was a straightforward piece, crafted from rich mahogany with clean lines, and I felt a quiet pride in it. Narrator, guilty as charged. Elara, voiceover, it's exquisite work. Truly. Narrator, she traced a finger along the edge of the bookshelf beside us. Elara, voiceover, did you create this as well? Narrator, no, that's a mass-produced item, I admitted. But I could certainly fashion something superior if you ever require it. The words tumbled out before I could censor them, and an immediate flush of foolishness washed over me. Was I genuinely offering to build furniture for someone I barely knew? What was wrong with me? But Elara simply chuckled, a genuine, melodious sound that pierced through the party's din. Elara, voiceover, I might just hold you to that. My apartment could certainly benefit from some actual furniture, rather than the motley collection of hand-me-downs and second-hand treasures I've accumulated. Narrator, we stood in comfortable silence for a moment, observing the revelry around us. Someone had put on music, a track with a pulsating bassline that rendered conversation difficult unless one leaned in close. Elara shifted a half-step nearer, and I caught the subtle, warm fragrance of her perfume, a blend of vanilla and cedar. Elara, voiceover, may I ask you something? She inquired, her voice dropping to a lower register. Do you genuinely enjoy these gatherings, or are you merely present because Ben subjected you to a guilt trip? Narrator, I considered fabricating a socially acceptable response, extolling the virtues of reconnecting with old acquaintances. But there was something in her tone, a knowing quality, as if she already held the answer and merely sought confirmation of my honesty. Narrator, mostly the guilt, I confessed, though it's not entirely dreadful. I mean, I'm having this conversation with you. Elara, voiceover, smooth, she teased, a smile playing on her lips. I was just about to step outside for some fresh air. Care to join me? Narrator, I followed her through the kitchen and out the back door onto Ben's compact patio. The cool night air kissed my skin, a welcome respite from the warmth and clamor of the house. Elara settled onto the steps leading to the garden, and I joined her, maintaining a respectable distance between us. The garden was small but meticulously kept, adorned with a few vibrant flower beds planted by Chloe and a somewhat ramshackle fire pit Ben had constructed himself. Above us, the sky was clear enough to reveal a scattering of stars, despite the urban glow. Elara, voiceover, much better, Elara sighed, taking a sip of her wine. I'd forgotten how overwhelming Ben's parties can be. He invites everyone he's ever crossed paths with. Narrator, you don't reside nearby anymore? I inquired. Elara, voiceover, about 2 hours north, in a city called Havenwood. I work for a non-profit dedicated to ecological education. We run programs for schools, summer camps, that sort of thing. She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. It's fulfilling work, meaningful work, but the compensation is precisely what you'd anticipate from a non-profit. Narrator, hence the hand-me-downs and thrift store treasures, I mused. Elara, voiceover, precisely. She turned to face me. What about you? Do you find satisfaction in your carpentry? Narrator, it was a simple question, yet it caught me off guard. Most people inquire about my profession, not whether I derive joy from it. Narrator, I do, actually, I admitted. There's a profound satisfaction in transforming raw timber into something functional, something enduring. Each piece possesses its own unique character, its own intricate grain. You have to collaborate with it, not against it. Elara, voiceover, that sounds almost philosophical. Narrator, perhaps it is, I conceded. I'd never truly considered it that way. I took a swig of my beer, which had grown lukewarm but, oddly, tasted better out here in the crisp air. What about your work? Do you enjoy it? Elara, voiceover, most days, I adore working with children, witnessing their excitement for nature and conservation. But sometimes, it feels like I'm fighting an uphill battle, you know. Climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, it can be overwhelming. Narrator, we settled into a comfortable silence for a few minutes, the muffled sounds of the party inside and the distant hum of traffic forming a gentle backdrop. A feline materialized from the shadows, approaching cautiously before settling near the fire pit, observing us with that quintessential cat-like blend of curiosity and disdain. Narrator, Ben's cat. I whispered. Elara, voiceover, he belongs to the neighbors, but he makes an appearance every night around this time. Ben started feeding him, so now he's convinced he owns the place. Narrator, Elara made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, and the cat's ears perked up. Elara, voiceover, his name is Chairman Meow, according to the neighbor. Not terribly imaginative, but he seems to approve. Narrator, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't anticipated. Elara possessed a conversational grace that made interaction feel effortless, unforced. She asked questions as if she genuinely desired the answers, and she listened intently, devoid of that glazed-over look people adopt when merely awaiting their turn to speak. Elara, voiceover, may I ask you something personal, she ventured after a while. Narrator, certainly. Elara, voiceover, are you happy? I mean, truly happy, not just content or getting by. Narrator, the question landed like a precise hammer blow. I opened my mouth to deliver the automatic reply, yes, of course, everything's fine. But something in her query, the genuine curiosity in her voice, made me pause. Narrator, that's a rather profound question to pose to someone you barely know, I finally managed. Elara, voiceover, we're not exactly strangers. And sometimes, it's easier to be candid with someone who has no preconceived notions about your answer. Narrator, she had a valid point. I reflected on my life, my modest apartment above the workshop, my work which I genuinely loved but which sometimes felt isolating. I considered the relationships that had come and gone, none of them quite fitting, like attempting to force the wrong piece into a complex puzzle. Narrator, I'm working on it, I admitted. I enjoy my work. I have good friends. I'm healthy. But sometimes, I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen, you know. Like I'm meticulously constructing this life, piece by piece, but I'm unsure of what the final product is meant to be. Elara, voiceover Elara nodded slowly. I understand completely. I relocated to Havenwood envisioning it as this grand adventure, this new chapter. And in many respects, it has been. But occasionally, I wake up and wonder if I'm simply playing at being an adult, as if I'm still awaiting instructions on what I'm supposed to do next. Narrator, how old are you now? I inquired. Elara, voiceover, 34. Old enough to have it all figured out, according to everyone else. Narrator, I'm 31, and I haven't figured anything out, I confessed. So, either we're both behind schedule, or perhaps no one truly has it all figured out, and they're just more adept at pretending. Elara, voiceover she laughed. I much prefer that theory. Narrator, the back door creaked open, and Chloe poked her head out. Chloe, voiceover, Elara, we're about to do the cake. Care to join us? Elara, voiceover, we'll be right there, Elara called back. Narrator, Chloe disappeared inside, and Elara turned to me, a subtle expression on her face that suggested she was steeling herself to face the crowd once more. Elara, voiceover, as ready as I'll ever be. Narrator, we rose, and as we approached the door, Elara's hand brushed lightly against my arm. Elara, voiceover, Julian, thank you for your candidness. It's refreshing. Narrator, the cake ceremony unfolded precisely as one might expect, Ben blowing out candles amidst off-key renditions of the birthday song, followed by the ritualistic slicing and distribution of cake to a room full of people already sated with party snacks. I found myself near the kitchen counter, savoring a surprisingly delicious slice of chocolate cake, and observing Elara navigate the crowd with an effortless grace I envied. She seemed to know most of the attendees, or at least she possessed a knack for engaging strangers in conversation. I watched her laugh at a joke, ask insightful questions about someone's profession, and compliment the hosts on the decorations. She possessed that rare quality of making people feel like the most fascinating individual in the room, at least for the brief moments she was conversing with them. Ben, voiceover, she's quite something, isn't she? Narrator, I turned to find Ben beside me, his gaze following mine towards his sister. Narrator, what do you mean? I attempted to sound nonchalant, but Ben had known me too long for the charade to work. Ben, voiceover, Elara. You've been observing her all evening. Narrator, I haven't been, I began to protest, but Ben interrupted with a knowing smile. Ben, voiceover, it's all right, man. She's unattached, in case you were curious. Has been for about 6 months now. Broke up with some fellow in Havenwood who was apparently more enamored with her potential than with the actual her, if you catch my drift. Narrator, I didn't entirely grasp his meaning, but I nodded regardless. Narrator, I was merely making conversation. She seems pleasant. Ben, voiceover, she is pleasant. She's also intelligent, witty, and according to our mother, desperately needs to settle down with a respectable man before her biological clock winds down. Ben rolled his eyes. Mom's exact words, not mine. But between you and me, Elara isn't the settling type. She's more the find someone who challenges her and makes her laugh type. Narrator, before I could delve deeper into his meaning, someone from across the room called Ben's name, and he was whisked away into another conversation. I stood there for a moment, processing his words, before deciding another beer was in order. The kitchen had grown quieter, the majority of the party having migrated to the living room where a boisterous game had commenced, punctuated by shouts and laughter. I was rummaging through the cooler when Elara reappeared beside me. Elara, voiceover, escaping again, she asked. Narrator, just grabbing a drink. Do you need anything? Elara, voiceover, I'm fine, thank you. She leaned against the counter, watching me open my beer. So, what's your narrative, Julian? Ben mentioned you've been unattached for a while. Narrator, did he now? I shot a look towards the living room, where Ben was presumably disseminating my personal life to anyone within earshot. What else did he divulge? Elara, voiceover, nothing scandalous, if that's your concern. Just that you're a good man who works diligently and doesn't socialize enough. Narrator, sounds about right, I conceded, taking a sip of the mercifully cold beer this time. What about you? Ben mentioned your recent relationship concluded. Elara, voiceover, did he give you the full saga, or just the Cliff's Notes? Narrator, just that it ended about 6 months ago. Narrator, Elara was silent for a moment, and I wondered if I'd overstepped, but then she sighed. Elara, voiceover, his name was Elias. We dated for almost 2 years. He was intelligent, successful, had his entire life meticulously charted in 5-year plans. The issue was, his plans for me didn't quite align with my plans for me. Narrator, what do you mean? Elara, voiceover, he envisioned me moving back here, securing a higher-paying job, contemplating marriage, children, and a house in the suburbs. All the things that present well on paper. She paused, tracing the rim of her wine glass. There's nothing inherently wrong with those aspirations, but they weren't what I desired. At least, not on his timeline, and not for his reasons. Narrator, I nodded, understanding more than I cared to admit. So, you remained in Havenwood. Elara, voiceover, I remained in Havenwood, and he remained here, finding someone else within 3 months. Someone who was ready for his 5-year plan. She shrugged, but I could discern the underlying hurt beneath the casual gesture. Turns out, he was more enamored with the idea of me than with the actual me. Narrator, that's rough. Elara, voiceover, it was, but it also clarified some things for me. Like the fact that I'd rather be alone and true to myself than coupled up and pretending to be someone I'm not. Narrator, we were interrupted by a burst of laughter from the living room, followed by what sounded like something toppling over. Elara and I both glanced towards the commotion, but no one seemed to be crying for help, so we stayed put. Elara, voiceover, what about you? Elara asked. What's your relationship history? Narrator, nothing as dramatic as yours. I was with someone for about 1.5 years. We ended things last spring. Elara, voiceover, her name was Sarah. Narrator, yes. She was wonderful, kind, intelligent, beautiful. But she possessed a vision for our shared life that felt like someone else's blueprint. She wanted us to move in together, to start planning a very specific future, house, marriage, children, the whole package. And when I couldn't commit to that timeline, she concluded I wasn't serious about the relationship. Elara, voiceover, were you serious about it? Narrator, it was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with for months. Narrator, I thought I was, but looking back, I believe I was more captivated by the idea of being in love than I was with her specifically. Does that make sense? Elara, voiceover, perfect sense. It's easy to get entangled in the narrative of what a relationship should look like, instead of paying attention to what it actually feels like. Narrator, exactly. I was surprised by the ease with which I could discuss these matters with her. Typically, conversations about past relationships felt like navigating a minefield. But with Elara, it felt more like comparing notes. So now I'm taking a hiatus from all that, focusing on my work, trying to discern what I actually desire, instead of what I believe I should desire. Elara, voiceover, and what do you think you actually desire? Narrator, the question lingered in the air between us. I looked at Elara, truly looked at her, and felt a subtle shift in my chest. She leaned against the counter, her wine glass forgotten in her hand, awaiting my answer with the same genuine curiosity she'd displayed all evening. Narrator, I want to feel like myself with someone, I finally said. I want to be with someone who sees who I genuinely am, not who they imagine I could become. I want conversations like this one, where I don't have to perform or pretend or strive to impress. Narrator, Elara smiled, and it was different from the polite smiles she'd been offering throughout the evening. This one reached her eyes. Elara, voiceover, that sounds like a rather excellent starting point. Narrator, before I could respond, the kitchen filled with people as the party game apparently reached some kind of boisterous conclusion. Ben appeared, slightly out of breath and grinning. Ben, voiceover, Julian, Elara, you're missing all the excitement. We're about to commence charades. Narrator, I looked at Elara, who made a face that suggested she'd rather do almost anything else. Elara, voiceover, actually, she said, smoothly, I was just telling Julian about that bookstore downtown that hosts poetry readings. I thought he might be interested. Narrator, this was news to me, but I played along. Narrator, sounds intriguing. We should probably depart soon if we want to catch the last reading. Elara, voiceover, it commences at 10 o'clock. Narrator, Ben looked between us with barely concealed amusement. Ben, voiceover, right, the poetry reading. Of course. He clapped me on the shoulder. Well, don't let me impede your cultural enrichment. Thanks for coming, man. Narrator, I bid farewell to Chloe and a few other acquaintances, then followed Elara towards the front door. She retrieved a light jacket from the coat closet, and we stepped out into the night air. Narrator, poetry reading? I inquired once we were out of earshot. Elara, voiceover, I panicked. It was the first thing that came to mind. She laughed, a sound that was becoming increasingly familiar and pleasant. Though there actually is a bookstore downtown that hosts readings. We could go if you wish, or we could simply walk. I'm not really in a hurry to be anywhere else. Narrator, I'd like that. Narrator, we began walking down the sidewalk, our pace slow and unhurried. The neighborhood was quiet, most of the houses emitting the warm glow of evening lights behind drawn curtains. It was the kind of night that invited you to linger outdoors, to continue walking and talking until the sun reappeared. Elara, voiceover, so, Elara began after we'd walked a block in comfortable silence. Was that as agonizing as you anticipated? Narrator, the party? Actually, no. It was better than I thought it would be. Because of the stimulating conversation and excellent cake, of course. Elara, voiceover, something like that. Narrator, We turned a corner onto a street lined with ancient oak trees, their branches forming a leafy canopy overhead. The streetlights filtered through the foliage, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow on the pavement. "Elara, voiceover, may I tell you something?" Elara said, her voice softer now. Narrator, certainly. Elara, voiceover, I almost didn't come tonight. I've been experiencing this phase where social gatherings feel utterly draining, as if I have to put on this performance of being alright, being sociable, being the person everyone expects me to be. Narrator, I understood that feeling completely. But you came anyway. Elara, voiceover, I came anyway, and I'm glad I did. She glanced at me sideways. Not just because of the excellent cake. Narrator, we walked another block, passing a small park where a few teenagers sat on swings, conversing with the animated intensity only teenagers can muster. Their voices carried in the still air, filled with drama and certainty about matters that would likely be inconsequential in a week. Elara, voiceover, were we ever that confident about anything? Elara asked, apparently following the same train of thought. Narrator, I thought I was. When I was 18, I had my entire life meticulously planned. I was going to attend university, earn a business degree, work for some large corporation, accumulate wealth, and retire early. Elara, voiceover, what happened? Narrator, university happened. Specifically, a mandatory art class where we had to work with our hands. I created this abysmal ceramic bowl that was lopsided and bore a crack down one side. But I loved the process of making it. I loved the tactile sensation of the clay, the way it transformed as I molded it. It was the first time I'd ever created something that existed purely because I made it, you know. Elara, voiceover. Elara nodded. So, you eventually changed majors. Narrator, it took me 2 years to muster the courage to disappoint my parents. They envisioned me in a suit, ascending the corporate ladder. Instead, I learned how to wield power tools and work with my hands. Elara, voiceover, do you regret it? Narrator, not for a second. Even when I'm dining on instant noodles because a client hasn't settled their invoice yet, I don't regret it. There's something profoundly satisfying about creating something that will outlast you, something that will be useful and beautiful long after you're gone. That's not something everyone gets to do with their work. Elara, voiceover, no, it's not. Narrator, I'm fortunate in that regard. I paused, a realization dawning on me. You possess that too, though. With your ecological education work, you're helping to cultivate a generation of individuals who care about the planet. That will outlast you as well. Narrator, Elara was silent for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Elara, voiceover, I never considered it that way. Most days, it feels like I'm merely trying to hold children's attention long enough for them to absorb something. But some of them do learn, and some of those children will grow up to make different choices because of what you imparted to them. That's a legacy. Narrator, thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it. Narrator, we had reached a small commercial district, a few blocks of shops and restaurants that were mostly closed at this hour. However, a coffee shop glowed with lights, and through the windows, I could discern a few patrons seated at tables, reading or working on laptops. Narrator, want to grab some coffee? I asked. Unless you need to head home. Elara, voiceover, coffee sounds perfect, and I'm in no rush. Narrator, the coffee shop was warm and inviting, adorned with mismatched furniture and local artwork. We ordered coffee for me, tea for Elara, and found a table by the window where we could observe the occasional car passing by. Elara, voiceover, this is lovely, Elara said, wrapping her hands around her mug. I don't do this enough anymore. Narrator, what? Drink tea. Elara, voiceover, no, just sit somewhere without an agenda. In Havenwood, I'm constantly rushing from one thing to the next, work, meetings, errands, social obligations. It's been months since I simply sat somewhere and had a conversation without checking the time. Narrator, I realized I'd been doing the same thing, perpetually contemplating the next project, the next deadline, the next task that demanded completion. Narrator: perhaps we're both too consumed with being productive to truly savor our lives. Elara: voiceover: probably. Elara took a sip of her tea, which emitted a warm, floral aroma. What do you do when you're not working? For enjoyment. Narrator: I read a lot, I confessed. Go for walks. Sometimes I'll spend a weekend afternoon at the farmer's market, just wandering and people watching. It sounded rather mundane when I articulated it, but Elara nodded as if it made perfect sense. Elara: voiceover: that sounds peaceful. I miss that. In Havenwood, I feel like I always have to be doing something, experiencing something, making the most of living in the city. But sometimes, I just want to sit on my couch and read a book without feeling like I'm squandering opportunities. Narrator: you could do that here. The words escaped before I could intercept them, and we both fell silent. I hadn't intended it as a suggestion that she relocate back, but that's precisely how it sounded. I began to retract my statement, but Elara raised a hand. Elara: voiceover: I know what you meant, she said. And you're right. I could do that anywhere. I think I've been so fixated on proving that I made the correct decision by moving away that I neglected to actually enjoy the choice. Narrator: we sat in comfortable silence for a while, observing the few other customers in the coffee shop. An elderly gentleman in the corner read a thick paperback, making notes in the margins. A young woman with vibrant purple hair typed furiously on a laptop, occasionally pausing to gaze out the window with the intense focus of someone grappling with a complex problem. Elara: voiceover: may I ask you something? Elara inquired eventually. Narrator: certainly. Elara: voiceover: this might sound peculiar, but do you ever feel like you're waiting for permission to live your life? Like you're holding back from pursuing things you genuinely desire because you're unsure if you're allowed to desire them? Narrator: the question struck closer to home than I was comfortable with. What kind of things? Elara: voiceover: I don't know. Taking chances, initiating changes, pursuing endeavors that might not succeed. She paused, looking down at her tea. Being candid about what you want from other people. Narrator: I contemplated that, the ways I held myself back from taking risks, from being vulnerable, from admitting when I desired something I wasn't sure I could possess. Narrator: yeah, I finally said. I think I do that. I think I've been doing that for a long time. Elara: voiceover: why do you think that is? Narrator: fear, probably. Fear of being disappointed, or disappointing other people. Fear of desiring something and not attaining it. I met her eyes across the table. What about you? What are you waiting for permission to do? Narrator: Elara was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd pushed too far. But then she spoke. Elara: voiceover: I think I'm waiting for permission to stop trying so diligently to prove I made the correct choices. To admit that perhaps I moved to Havenwood partly because I was fleeing from things here, and that perhaps some of those things are worth returning to. Narrator: what kind of things? Elara: voiceover: family, old friendships, the possibility of building something enduring instead of perpetually starting anew. She looked at me directly. People who see me for who I actually am, instead of who they believe I should be. Narrator: the air between us felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm when you can sense the electricity building. I longed to reach across the table and take her hand, to tell her that I saw her, that I'd been seeing her all evening in a way that felt both novel and familiar. Instead, I said, for what it's worth, I think you're exactly who you're meant to be. Even if you're 34 and haven't figured out your life, especially because of that. Anyone who claims to have everything figured out at 34 is probably deceiving themselves. Narrator: Elara smiled, and again, it was that genuine smile that transformed her entire face. Elara: voiceover: you know, when Ben first mentioned you tonight, I anticipated you'd be one of those guys who talks about sports and complains about his ex-girlfriend. Narrator: sorry to disappoint you. Elara, voiceover, you didn't disappoint me. You surprised me. That's much better. Narrator, the coffee shop was beginning to empty, and I noticed the barista behind the counter starting to clean up for closing. I checked my watch and was surprised to see it was almost 11:30. We'd been conversing for hours, but it felt like minutes. Narrator, I should probably let you get home, I said reluctantly. Elara, voiceover, probably, but I don't want to. Narrator, the honesty of the statement hung between us. I didn't want the evening to conclude either. Didn't want to return to my small apartment and my routine, and the careful distance I maintained from most people. Elara, voiceover, walk me to my car. Elara asked. Narrator, of course. Narrator, we gathered our belongings and stepped back out into the night air. Elara's car was parked a few blocks away, back in the direction of Ben's house. We walked slowly, neither of us in any hurry to reach our destination. Elara, voiceover, Julian, Elara said as we turned onto her street. Narrator, yes. Elara, voiceover, may I tell you something? Just between us. Narrator, certainly. Narrator, she stopped walking and turned to face me. We stood beneath a street lamp, and I could discern something vulnerable in her expression, something that made my chest tighten. Elara, voiceover, I haven't felt this comfortable with someone in a long time, she said quietly. This entire evening has felt like unearthing something I didn't realize I was searching for. Narrator, I felt the same way, but the words seemed too vast, too significant to simply utter aloud on a sidewalk. Instead, I stepped closer to her, close enough that I could discern the flecks of